Welcome back. In the last episode we cleaned out the fuel system on this Winton 9HP. This episode we're getting it all back together again. But some other exciting news. I've been talking to the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County and they've been giving me loads of great information about the oil levels and how to keep this thing running. But also they've confirmed that their Winton is a 9HP. So there's two of these little babies in the world, but this is the one we're going to get back on the road. But first, back to the computer. I took a photograph of the gasket, then dropped it into FreeCAD. I used that as a guide to draw over the top, then refined it with measurements. Quickly realised that all these holes were hand drilled, nothing really lined up. But then once I got a final design, I dropped that onto the laser cutter and cut myself a new gasket out of gasket paper. And I can cut as many as I want in the future. Okay, so after that little bit of technical wizardry, I now have a couple of gaskets that line up, and if I ever need them again, I can just print out another couple quite quickly. Obviously I hope that I will never need them again, but you never know. Okay, so that's all as clean as I'm going to get it, I think. There's some really well stuck on dirt on some of the meshes that I'd rather just leave it there because it's not going anywhere than damage the meshes. So time to put them back in. Carefully does it. And I've been having to keep the correct order of these all the way through. Now there's actually a ring already seated in this chamber that gives this the correct position. So there we go. That's all ready for the gasket to go on, then the top layer. But before I do that, I'm just going to put a smear of Hylamar on, just a little flexible sealant, just to take up any little imperfections in this surface. It's pretty flat, but there's a few tiny marks in it, so this is a sealant that will stay flexible. There you go. One Winton mixer valve, all nice and clean and shiny-ish. Now this is the part that lets fuel into the actual mixer valve. So you've got a tiny little hole down the end of that shaft, and you've got this needle. So the needle is attached to the top of the valve, so when the valve's closed, when the inlet valve's closed, then that fills up the hole. And then as the inlet valve opens, I'm going to exaggerate this a bit, but that comes out of the hole to let the petrol into the mixer valve, and that then keeps happening to let fuel in at a measured rate rather than just pouring it in like a tap. So we'll refit that into the mixer valve, and I'm not going to tighten up the lock nut at this point because I've got to get the angle right. But I haven't moved the lock nut from when I took it out, so that will give me a good idea for where it needs to be. Another tip. So I've got the surfaces covered in Hylamar and the new gasket on. So now I've just got to try and get the fuel mixer on. There's a few bits to line up with between the needle and the fuel pump, and of course the all-important fixing bolts. So this is a bit tricky. I kind of need another pair of hands as well as a lot more access. But here we go. It's got one of the fixing bolts loosely in, so I can now try and get the fuel pipe aligned. Which is loosely in now. So now I just need to tighten everything up. Now there's no manual for these cars that I've found anyway, so having to make this up a bit as I go along just by my understanding of how it's supposed to work. So this shiny shaft here, that's the needle I was showing you earlier that goes in the top of the mixer valve, and this nut and the thread is attached to the top of the valve. Now between those there's a spring, so this needle is already being pushed into the seat that we could just about see earlier. So what I need to do is to replace this metal pin back, and this is going to need some adjustment because the gasket has changed and we've had things apart, so I need to make sure that it all lines up. So the first thing I'm trying to do is seeing if I can see the hole that the pin goes through, which I can just about see the hole. So I suspect I'm better off moving the fuel inlet hole back until that lines up with the hole. Okay, so it's a bit tricky to show you, but I've wound this out a little. You can see by how far that knot's moved to move the seat further this way. That will then let me use the thread on the adjuster to get the hole in the right place. As you can see, I've still got some play on the needle there, so that's good. It lets the spring do the work rather than anything else. So let's readjust the camera to show the adjuster again. So that's now the needle held by the spring, so the valve itself is free floating and finding its own position. And again, you can hear it closing, which is nice. I can put this metal spike back in. It seems a little precarious, this bit of wire, to lock everything in place. I've just realised this funny shaped bit of wire is actually a straightened R-clip. So I'm going to find a split pin to go through here to replace that, because then I can make sure it won't jump out of place as well, which would be a disaster. Now I can go back to replacing the fuel pipe. Which is a bit of a wiggle. I'm obviously going to move that fuel inlet seat slightly, but I haven't got much choice over that. Get that loosely put on. I can screw more light on the subject. Screw this in. And tighten it all up with the spanner. I'll tighten up that lock nut as well. I had moved that. I haven't changed the adjustment that much. So I'll tighten all that lot up with the spanner, and then, well, I think we're ready to go. Now, just revisiting the top of the valve, you can see that bit of wire that is obviously a straightened out R-clip quite clearly. So I'm going to remove that again. I'll say it's quite well in there, but I don't want the risk of it jiggling out in the 60 miles to Brighton, because then we'd lose all of our fuel intake. We're going to replace that nasty straightened R-clip with a split pin, so I just have to get this in the hole here and then fork the legs. Now you can see the split pin's in place, and as the valve goes in and out, then the legs go up and down the slot to stop it all rotating, and it all stays nicely in place. So that should get us to Brighton and hopefully beyond. At the moment, I don't know if this fuel gauge works, so I've temporarily printed a little pointer for it so that I can tell if it does change when we put fuel in there. I'll change it for something a bit more period if it does work, but it's a start. So I've sourced a new O-ring for the float chamber here. It's made of Viton that should be more resistant to the modern fuels. Now I'm really glad that I found this problem at this stage, because otherwise it would have leaked fuel everywhere, and that's really not what I want. So finding it at this point where everything was nice and controlled is a much better thing. It's quite fiddly to get in here, but that's now nicely fixed. Thanks for watching. Now don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see when the next episode comes out. See you next time.